physical, emotional stress during this unprecedented time. So thank you so much, Aviva, and we certainly look forward to the next hour with you. We will put you all on mute, but you're welcome to make use of the chat box. We will be monitoring questions and we will interrupt Aviva if questions come up. Also, in terms of the ORJET program, for those of you that know about the program, we are a non-profit organization and we do rely on funding from the community, from both our donors and businesses, and really anyone who would like to make a donation to us. I will, before the end of the session, put our details in the chat box, and should you wish to make a donation, we would be extremely grateful. So Aviva, over to you, and thank you so much again for this morning.
Okay, it's a great pleasure. Thanks very much for inviting me, and it's really nice to see a whole bunch of people here. Some I know, some I don't know. And I was trying not to put pressure on all of you to put your videos on, but I would love to see your face because it's so much easier to connect with people rather than just seeing a black square with a name in it. So thank you for those of you who are willing to take the plunge, show us your grey hair, your long hair, your bedroom, wherever you are. I'm actually relaxing on my bed with a hot cup of a drink, and it's the warmest place in the house. So I hope all of you have got something hot and you're feeling warm and you're ready for some new information. So I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a lot of slides and a video to show you. So let me just see that it works. Okay, can everybody see? Okay, all right.
Yes, all fine.
Thank you. All right, so let's begin with what I would like to cover today. I know in my head that less is more, and I still struggle to prune down my agenda. But just to briefly tell you why I've chosen this topic, show you a little video, look at the system that I use, the framework that I use for the self-acceptance tree, go into more details about what actually is self-acceptance, some causes of low self-acceptance, touch on some research, and then look at toxic criticism, what we often do to ourselves in our head, which is like a life behind bars. And then the opposite of that is freedom. And then to talk about the life-changing impact of having low self-acceptance and high self-acceptance, the 4 S's of self-acceptance, so some practical tips and strategies for you guys, an ancient prayer for healing, and loving kindness meditation. So we're going to have 2 tools at the end that you can experience unless we run out of time. And then I don't think we're going to have a chance for me to share with you some questions to help you kickstart your own change in this area. But perhaps when Tracy sends out a mail afterwards, I can provide the questions in there. Okay. So let's kick off. Why have I chosen this topic? Well, self-acceptance is close to my heart because I've struggled with self-acceptance for many, many years, having a very loud inner critic in my head that kind of beats me up and creates a lot of anxiety. And it's taken me many, many years and trying lots of different things and doing lots of research to try to get a handle on it. And I think I'm getting there, but I think it's kind of like a journey. Just because you can work on managing your inner critic, it doesn't mean that it's gone for good. It can rear its ugly head at any time. So it's something that I work with very regularly. And as a coach, and I used to be a therapist as well, I've seen a lot of my clients who've suffered. There's been a lot of pain and suffering from having low levels of self-acceptance. And how that shows up in my practice, for some people, it creates a lot of anxiety. For some people, it creates depression. But for many, it creates this desire to please and to forgo your own needs and prioritize other people's needs instead of your own. And for some people, it means they're always trying to prove themselves because they don't feel capable enough. So they're always trying to improve, to keep improving and keep proving. and do more and more courses and check their work. And sometimes people become workaholics because they're trying so hard to look successful and look competent because they're not feeling capable. So I'll talk a little bit more around the three underlying fears that can actually kind of start instigating this low levels of self-acceptance. So yeah, this topic is very important, and from the amount of people that registered, even though not everybody's arrived, it showed that it was quite an important topic for a lot of people. So quickly moving on, I want to show you this video, which brings tears to myself every time I watch it, and I've watched it many, many times. So let's just have a look at this man's experience around acceptance and love. And excuse the colouring. The quality of the colour is not so good. All right, I'm just going to play it for you now. Oopsie.
My stepfather, would beat me, and he would beat me with extension cords and hangers and, pieces of wood and all kinds of stuff. And, after every beating, he would tell me, it hurt me more than it hurt you. And, I only did it because I love you. It was kind of, it communicated the wrong message to me about what love was. So for many years, I thought that love was supposed to hurt. And I hurt everyone that I loved. And I measured love by how much pain someone would take from me. And it wasn't until I came to prison in an environment that is devoid of love that I began to have some sort of understanding about what it actually was and was not. And I met someone, and she gave me my first real insight into what love was, because she saw past my condition and the fact that I was in prison with a life sentence for murder. And not only for murder, but for doing the worst kind of murder that a man can do, murdering a woman and a child. And it was Agnes, the mother and grandmother of Patricia and Chris, the woman and child that I murdered, who gave me my best lesson about love, because by all rights, she should hate me. But she didn't. And over the course of time and through the journey that we took, that's been pretty amazing. She gave me love, and she taught me what it was.
So I don't know how you're feeling after watching this clip, but it gets me in the throat every time. And it just shows me that if a woman can forgive this man and show love to this man after he has murdered her child and grandchild, why is it so difficult for us to accept and love ourselves? So yeah, I'm just going to let you be with your feelings just for a moment. just to notice what comes up for you. And that's talking about accepting and loving someone else, which is often easier. But to accept and love ourselves is what I want to talk about today. So if we see this framework that I've created called the self-acceptance tree, with some lightning striking the tree, and to imagine that this tree is actually ourselves, and we weather storms throughout our life, just like this tree weathers storms. And what's really important about ourselves and our life is the importance to develop strong roots that ground us, that allow us to grow tall and strong and remain resilient in times of adversity. So this is what this tree symbolizes. And you'll see at the bottom, there's the 4 S's that I mentioned in the advert. And these are our roots. And this is what's really, really important when we think about how we function in the world. So I will talk about the 4 S's later, but it begins with stillness, moves to self-awareness, then to self-compassion, and then to self-regulation. If we have strong roots, that means we have high levels of self-acceptance that allows us to build self-esteem, which is the core of that trunk, of our tree. The way we regard ourselves, the way we see our sense of worth. If we have strong self-esteem, it allows us to have self-belief. It allows us to have self-respect. It offers us self-confidence and to feel self-empowered. And when we have those strong roots and that self-respect and that self-belief, we can remain resilient, we can feel free, we can become resourceful, we can have more peace of mind. And when we have those qualities and those skills, then we can realize ourselves. So then the dreams that we have, instead of becoming dreams, we can apply them, we can put them into practice. So I hope that this tree can offer you a visual framework to see the importance of those 4 S's, to build a life where we feel successful and capable and loved. I'm just going to quickly run through what actually is self-acceptance, because it sounds good, but sometimes it's hard to know what it really means. So I've highlighted 2 statements here. Tolerating one's imperfections. I like that one, because we are all imperfect, but it's, can we be tolerant? Can we tolerate our own imperfections without kind of beating ourselves up about them? That's normal. Nobody's perfect. It's also the quality of the rapport that we have with our inner self. So it's often easy to develop rapport with other people, but can we have rapport with our own inner self and connect deeply to what we tell ourselves and who we believe we are? And what's important is that we accept our reality, that we are aware of our strengths and our weaknesses, that we can feel satisfied with ourselves despite the gaps and regardless of past behaviors and choices that we've made, because everybody makes wrong choices and everybody makes mistakes. It's normal. But can we be satisfied with ourselves no matter what? Can we realistically appraise our capabilities and our general worth rather than focusing in on our flaws and magnifying them? Can we tell ourselves the truth about who we are rather than often listening to a pack of lies that we tell ourselves in our heads? Because self-acceptance is crucial for good mental health. So I hope that's given you a foundation into what we are going to be looking at today. and what self-acceptance really means. So just to kind of step back and think, okay, why do some people have such low self-acceptance and other people have high self-acceptance? So I've just covered some points here, and they do go back to our early lives. And if we have, as we're growing up, disapproving authority figures, then we start to believe that what these people tell us is the truth. If we're criticized a lot, then we start to feel not good enough, and we start to feel shame that somehow we're disappointing our parents, our carers, our teachers, because they're making it quite clear that they're disapproving. And then we start to kind of integrate that into our system. Or it might be that we've had uninvolved carers. So if our caregivers are not very present, for whatever reasons, we start to feel that we are not worth paying attention to or not worth acknowledging. And again, that starts to be kind of taken in on an emotional, a physical, a mental, a spiritual level. If there's conflict in the home, often kids start to personalize that, and they think maybe they've done something wrong to create that conflict, and it feels like quite an unsafe place to be. And a lot of anxiety and fears can come about, especially around, am I the cause of the problems at home? And children can have these very critical thoughts from very early on. I don't like myself, or I'm not worthy, and they can carry these thoughts the rest of their lives. If one is bullied, then unless you have very strong self-acceptance and self-esteem, then you start to believe that if somebody's ridiculing you or beating you, that somehow maybe you deserve it. Even if that's absolute furthest from the truth, you start to think, well, this person is damaging me in some way. So maybe they've seen something in me that I don't know, and maybe they're right, which is exceptionally sad. And if we had academic challenges as we grew up, then we can see that we're struggling to keep up with a class, or at university, we're struggling to keep up with our peers. And often teachers or tutors don't necessarily always see the impact of their comments. And a lot of people that I've met have struggled with bullying, or struggled with kind of falling behind at school, or being made to feel like a failure because they couldn't keep up. Trauma and abuse. Obviously, that's huge amounts of pain that an individual has to suffer, and it can actually wear down your levels of self-acceptance and self-esteem to such a degree that you can't leave the abusive situation, especially if you're a child, where you went to go. So again, it can really lead people to feel a lot of shame and to internalize what the people have said to them or what they've done to them. So they start to believe that they are, they're not worthy of being treated kindly. Now, this is an interesting one. Religious beliefs around sinning. In many religions, we're taught that kind of God is there to judge our behavior, and certain behaviors are counted as sins. So if we grow up with that, and it's difficult to kind of discern, what is the real truth and what is just kind of a concept, then we can grow to start thinking that we must be ashamed of what we've done. So that's quite difficult for a lot of people, is to constantly feel judged, because we do a lot of judgment ourselves. So to feel like you're kind of being judged by a higher power can be very difficult for a lot of people. And then, of course, society and media pressure. What we see around us does often, sink in. If we see everybody looking successful, looking beautiful, with this happy family and a beautiful home and all these accolades, we can start to feel not enough. And we can compare, even though it's not healthy to compare. It's quite normal to compare. And the more we build up our own levels of self-acceptance, the less we need to compare, because we are happy with who we are. It doesn't matter about anybody else. So yeah, those are some of the causes of low self-acceptance and pain. And that's, that lightning strike is, again, those kind of adversities do have an impact. Briefly, to just touch on research here. 5,000 people were interviewed about the kind of well-being habits they engage in. And sadly, you see there, acceptance is the lowest score out of all of them. So how often are you kind to yourself and think you're fine as you are was the lowest score. And giving, how often do you make an effort to help or be kind to others, was the highest score. So it goes to show that we tend to get into habits of helping others and giving to others, but deprioritizing ourselves, which again is very sad that we put our own worth as lower than everybody else. And through improving self-acceptance, research has shown that it keeps depression at bay. So a shift in perspective is what's important. So moving from scrutinizing ourselves with a magnifying glass, which obviously takes those flaws and magnifies them, so that's what becomes our reality, and shifting over to using a loving mirror when we look at ourselves. So, metaphorically speaking, if we imagine putting our magnifying glass down and utilizing a large loving mirror. So instead of focusing on our flaws, we look at the bigger picture. We notice the strengths that we have. We notice our own humanity, and we start to tell ourselves the full truth so that we can leverage what we do have in order to grow and be successful. So I've likened low self-acceptance with this kind of critical script that we might hold in our head to a life behind bars, like that guy had. And we, in a way, imprison ourselves with the thoughts that we play to ourselves, because our thoughts become what we believe about ourselves, and that becomes our reality, because the thoughts lead to different feelings that we experience, and that impacts on what we do in life. So I've mentioned some of the thoughts and beliefs that I used to hold, and some of them that I might still hold. Money doesn't come easy to me. I'll never be successful. I'm useless at marketing. I'll never find another soulmate. Others have it better than me. I'm not a good mother. I have a terrible memory. And now, if I say that to myself, or I say any of those to myself over and over again, that's what you believe, and you limit yourself. And you can't fly, you can't be your best self if you are steeped in those negative thoughts and beliefs. And I call them stinking thinking, because they kind of do stink, really. And it's a stink that doesn't really leave you unless we get a handle on it. So these are normal to have these kind of thoughts, as I mentioned, but it's about the frequency and the consistency of whether we say them a lot and we start to believe them fully, or whether we can notice that they're a bit more fleeting and we start to kind of disempower them more, because they're not us. They are just our thoughts. It doesn't mean they're the truth. So we're frequently telling ourselves that we are not enough in whatever shape or form. Whether it's successful enough, worthy of love, beautiful, clever enough, good enough parent, good enough partner, whatever, we often say to ourselves, we are not enough. And from that space, we are trapped, we're like a victim. And we often hold unrealistic expectations for ourselves that can never be met, because we can never be perfect. So I wanted to mention here that often the thoughts that we have are connected to 3 underlying beliefs. So we might believe that we are not significant. We don't matter. Our voice doesn't count. It's all linked to significance. And when we believe that we're not significant and we don't matter, we feel invisible. which might make us want to withdraw even more, or to kind of fight to get heard, to fight to kind of prove that we have got something to say. So it depends on whether we kind of fight or flee, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The second underlying fear is fear that you're not competent enough. So it's fear of your own level of competence. And if you fear that you're not competent, that's when we get some of those thoughts. I'm going to fail. I've got to prove myself. I'm never going to get it right. I'm not going to get that promotion, so why should I try? Because other people are cleverer than me. Or I'm going to be found out that I'm a fraud. So it sets off a whole set of destructive thoughts, toxic thoughts, if we have those kind of fears. And the final fear is that we are not likable enough or not lovable. And that often leads to thoughts around, I'm never going to get a partner, or there's no point in me leaving this partner because maybe I'm not worth having somebody who's going to treat me better, and so on and so forth. So it's significance, competence, and likability. And while I'm talking, I'm just going to ask you to just become aware of maybe some of the thoughts that you tell yourself, and whether you can link it to any of those beliefs around your levels of likability, significance, and competence. And these thoughts and these beliefs have a detrimental effect on our emotional landscape and on how we show up in the world. So I'm going to show you now some feelings, a broad range of different feelings, and I'm going to ask you to connect to maybe one of those thoughts or one of the beliefs that you hold about yourself and that you recognize because it's been around for a long time, and then look at how it makes you feel. So you can see here, there's two axes. The horizontal axis at the bottom is about the pleasantness of the feeling, whether it's unpleasant or pleasant. And the vertical axis is about what it does to your energy. Some feelings create a lot of low energy and other feelings create high energy. So I'm going to ask you to just identify, if you're sitting with some of those thoughts and beliefs, what kind of feelings show up. And maybe if you can just start sharing some of the feelings in the chat box, and then we can just see the kind of things that we go through when we tell ourselves what we tell ourselves. Feel free, we are here to be ourselves, to not have to hide and pretend everything's fine. I mean, I don't mind sharing that when I have some of those thoughts that I put on the screen, I can feel down, I can feel discouraged, disappointed, alienated, depressed, hopeless, despairing, drained. I can feel frustrated with myself. I can feel anxious. I can feel uneasy, concerned, pretty much most of those feelings on the left-hand side. So I don't know whether when I'm screen sharing, I can see the chat box. Maybe.
Aviva, we have one comment, definitely all the blue.
Yeah.
Another comment, I tend to be anxious. Another comment, I tend to say to myself that I'm mediocre, ordinary, not sure where that fits in. And a further comment, alienated.
Yeah. Well, if I'm mediocre, if I'm ordinary, I'm kind of, you know, I'm not very, maybe I'm not very capable, you know, I'm just not as good as other people, or maybe I'm not as, you know, important as other people. You know, that links to the significance. Okay, so I hope that helps. So yeah, so bottom line is we can see that when we have those thoughts and beliefs, it drains us. Now, some of these feelings are high energy, especially anger and frustration is a high energy. And we're also, it's important that we don't judge ourselves on the feelings that we have. Feelings are useful data. They tell us something, you know, they tell us how we're feeling, and that's vital. You know, all feelings count. And just like we would care about the feelings of other people, it's important to care about our own feelings. And as soon as we know how we feel, then, and we can name it, it actually often helps to diffuse some of the intensity of the feeling. Now, I was talking about anger energy being quite a high energy feeling. And, you know, anger can lead to some really productive and constructive actions if we've kind of separated from it a little bit. You know, a lot of people kind of set up NGOs after somebody's kind of, you know, drunk driven and killed their child or something quite drastic. They use that anger to set up, you know, to launch campaigns, to set up things. So to just kind of think, you know, that it's really important to recognize and acknowledge our feelings and see whether they're leading us towards a particular kind of action. And sometimes it just leads us to want to withdraw. And that can be useful at the start to kind of recover from whatever's happened, but not to kind of stay withdrawn, because then we lose out on opportunities and relationships. So I'm going to move forward now, if I can. I don't know why it's not moving me. For some reason, it's not allowing me to move out. I don't know why. Okay.
We're still on the same screen.
Yeah, I'm trying to move.
Okay.
Okay. So when we speak about the self-critical mindset that we have, it's actually pretty toxic. It can lead us to reject ourselves, to blame ourselves, to criticize ourselves, to insult ourselves, to doubt ourselves. And then when we do that to ourselves, we can feel guilty. You know, if we say we're not good enough, we're not a good enough parent, then we can feel guilty, or we can feel ashamed about our lack of capability in that area. We can feel like a failure, and we can even start to self-loathe. So you can see how toxic this is. What we're aiming for, if we take away that magnifying glass and move to that heart-shaped mirror, is to start to counteract the experiences of what's happening in the brain. So when we tell ourselves we're not enough, we're not good enough, we don't count, you know, we're never going to make it, then we are telling our brain that there's a threat. And the brain doesn't know whether it's a real threat or a perceived threat. We're placing ourselves under threat in a way. And when our brain perceives a threat, then the amygdala, maybe some of you have heard it before, is activated and activates this natural fight, flight, or freeze response. And when that happens, we can't think clearly. We are kind of overrun with anxiety. And we can ruminate, we can get stuck with obsessive thinking and get paralyzed, and then either withdraw or want to fight. So for some people, if somebody makes a comment to them like, you're just useless, that can trigger all the beliefs that we have about ourselves, and then we can want to fight and defend ourselves and say, yeah, actually you're useless. And we can kind of want to get aggressive and fight back to protect ourselves from that threat. Or we can withdraw and just kind of sink into ourselves and just think, yeah, I am useless, actually, you're right, you know. And then we don't want to take risks, and we don't want to take new opportunities, because we are believing what our brain is telling us and what other people might be mentioning. So this, the bottom line is, when we start to think like this, we create our own sense of threat, and the frontal lobes, which is the part of our brain that deals with executive functioning, like being able to problem solve and organize and plan and think clearly and creatively, it shuts down. So, we actually create our own, kind of feeling of being out of control and feeling anxious and feeling useless, because we can't think clearly. So it's really, really important to calm ourselves at these times so that we don't go into fight or flight or freeze. What we're aiming for is freedom. So when we use the kind of loving mirror, and imagine yourselves looking into a mirror without saying, oh my God, I don't like the shape of my nose. I can see my grey hairs. I don't like my chin, or I'm really fat. And that's when we start to go into toxic self-criticism. Rather, if we look into the mirror with love, which might be hard, and with acceptance, and if we're in a dark space, is just to look at the whole picture and say, but from darkness can come light. I am successful. I am a good person. I can love myself. I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to be perfect. I'm just doing the best I can with what I've got. And now those statements are statements that I might have used to myself. The ones that you might use to yourself could look very different. But it's about putting out the rational truth in front of us, not the lies that we often tell ourselves. And we can use it for ourselves and we can use it for other people. So when we're very angry with someone else and we're not accepting someone else, we can just say people do the best they can with what they've got. We don't know their situation. We don't know their context. Just like our context could be very challenging, and we're just trying our very best. So it's really important that we use reassuring words, that we use realistic words, that we use hopeful, optimistic, encouraging words to try to get ourselves out of that fight or flight process that's going on in our brain. Because here, there are no prison bars. There's just a door that can open with a lot of growth opportunities around us. And when we are offering ourselves these kind of affirming thoughts and beliefs, what kind of feelings can we have? So if we go back to that meter, that mood meter, what kind of feelings do you have when you are feeling self-accepting? And when you are telling yourself, I'm just doing the best I can. I'm doing okay. I'm all right. I'm worthy. What kind of feelings do you have then? If you don't mind to share on the chat box.
No comments coming through yet. Oh,
Okay.
content. We have one that says content.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Focused, optimistic, inspired, hopeful, lively, comfy.
And the great thing about when you start feeding your mind with more realistic and truthful comments, it automatically starts to make us feel some of those feelings on the right-hand side, which gives us energy, makes us feel confident, builds our self-esteem, makes us have self-respect, and then we can start to flourish. So it's kind of like this is the vicious cycle, and this is the kind of positive cycle where the more good, the better you feel, the more confident you feel, the more confident you feel, the more likely you are to be successful. Because when we're in this space, we are more likely to mess up because we're anxious and we forget things and we make mistakes. Whereas here, we're more likely to be successful. And then it can prove to ourselves that we are good enough, that we are capable, that we do matter. So this is a really good start, is just to identify our thoughts, look at our feelings, and then start to look at the truth. For some reason my slides keep getting stuck. So to recap, if we have low self-acceptance, there is life-changing impact. We make poor choices. We're so desired to win the approval of others. We critique ourselves, blame ourselves, reject ourselves, shame ourselves. It leads to low self-confidence, low self-belief. We can fear failure, and we can have performance anxiety. So that is what we're obviously trying to stay away from. And Brené Brown, who I absolutely love, you might have heard of her. She's a well-known author, and she does many podcasts, and she is a social researcher, and she's done a lot of work on shame and vulnerability and belonging. She says, let go of who you think you are supposed to be and be who you are. Be who you are means you're happy with who you are. You're unique and you've got particular skills and qualities that you bring to the world that are different from other people, and that's great. And as soon as we can step in to being our own unique self and being authentic with that, and going, it doesn't really matter so much what everybody else thinks of me, because I can't make everybody happy. I can't get approval from everybody. And is that what I'm really looking for? And conversely, there's life-changing impact when we have high self-acceptance. When we heal our relationship with ourselves, it changes everything. The journey begins with self-compassionate thoughts and actions. We hold ourselves in high regard and our self-confidence grows. We're capable of deeper and more satisfying relationships. We have more peace of mind, feel lighter and more empowered, and our mental health thus improves. We take responsibility for our choices. We take more risks because we're not afraid of failing. We have more energy and our physical health improves. We become less reactive and more resilient. We can see the bigger picture. We make more effective decisions and become more creative. So in total, we become more successful in the world, no matter what we're trying to do, when we have high levels of self-acceptance. So I want to go back to those roots that I showed you in the beginning, those 4 S's, the roots that keep us strong. And let's go into those in a little bit more detail. So number 1 is stillness. Now, having low self-acceptance and some of those negative thoughts and beliefs, they're not always conscious. So we're not always conscious when they arrive because we become so familiar with them. So it's pretty important to still our mind enough to be with what is, to be with our reality. And our reality at that moment might be very judgmental of ourselves. So if we can still our mind in whatever way we can, for some people they'll use mindfulness meditation. For other people they might use exercise. For other, they might just go for a walk. They might sit outside in nature. They might go for a swim. Some people become mindful when they're doing the ironing. If they like doing the ironing and it just kind of takes their mind off, the busyness of life, that's when you can be still. So no matter what you do to get a stiller mind, it doesn't matter. There's no wrong or right here. But what we're aiming for is to observe our thoughts, observe our feelings, not judge them, just notice them, and effectively calm down our amygdala, that part of the brain that activates the fight or flight. And while we're calm, we can think, okay, I've got that self-talk in there. It's becoming very critical. I'm feeling quite depleted. I'm feeling quite anxious. Now we need to start thinking about, what do we do with that? So this is the 3rd S of self-compassion. Self-kindness, self-care, and self-compassionate practices are the antidote to self-criticism. So developing a nurturing relationship with yourself through opening your heart and giving yourself a healthy dose of self-acceptance is key, just like we would do for other people. It's not difficult often for us to show love to other people, to friends, to family, even to animals. We can pour love on everybody else and give so little to ourselves, which doesn't really make sense. And the 4th S is self-regulation, which some people call emotional intelligence, EQ. And we're trying to regulate our thoughts. We're trying to regulate our feelings. We're trying to regulate our behavior so that we do what is going to help us be our best selves. And having those kind of critiquing, judgmental, toxic thoughts is never going to allow us to be our best selves. So the 5 R's of EQ, of self-regulation, is to hold a realistic perspective. Is to think about, what I'm expecting myself to do, is that fair? Would I expect that of others? And for some people, they say, yeah, I would. Often we do have very high expectations of others and ourselves, but is it realistic? Especially now when we're on lockdown. Some people are putting highly unrealistic expectations on themselves, to be able to do this, that, and the other, use my time well, learn a language, do this, get out there, market. But sometimes we're not paying attention to the fact that we're exhausted, we're depleted, we're overwhelmed, and we're anxious. And until we can offer that self-compassion to ourselves, it's highly unlikely we're going to have enough energy and focus and creativity to do all the things that we're telling ourselves we should be doing. The second R is to refocus. If you, as soon as you notice that you're going down into I can't, I'll never, there's no way, very kind of negative judgments on ourselves, is to refocus on our positive assets. They are real, they are true, they might not always be consistent, but that's okay. We don't have to always be consistent. We still have them. They just need to be unearthed and refocused. Then the third R is research for evidence. So if we're telling ourselves, you know, I'm a failure, I'm no good, and we imagine that we take that statement to court, and we imagine that there's a judge there, the judge is going to say, if you're bringing this into my courtroom, I want at least 5 pieces of evidence for what you're saying. Otherwise, I'm throwing you out of court. So when you're telling yourself something, often it's a generalization, it's an assumption, it's a judgment, it's an accusation, it's a blaming comment. I want you to imagine taking it to court and looking for 5 pieces of evidence. And if you can't have 5 pieces of evidence, it's not the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me, Lord. Then you've got to throw it out of court and look for what is the truth and reframe that self-talk and that negative situation with something which is more positive, more hopeful, more realistic, and more truthful. What's also important is recovery time. So, you know, we are, especially now when people are trying to juggle home, work, there's a lot of, you know, anxiety and pressure about the future and all the uncertainty and financial stresses, is to build in recovery time, where we take a self-compassionate view and we say, what can I do that will help me to calm, or that will help me to get energy so that I can keep on going? And it might be the people you choose to spend your time with, even if it's on Zoom. It might be that you do exercise and that helps you get into a better mindset and helps you to recover. It might be that you go into nature. It's whatever your happy space is or your calm space is to allow yourself and build in space to recover. So so far I haven't got any questions, so I hope you're not being shy, or maybe it's because things are clear, but feel free to ask any questions before we start closing. But it is our choice to notice and to examine what we're telling ourselves and look for the truth and try to reframe as much as possible, because everybody is worthy of compassion. If we can give it to everybody else, why can't we open our heart and give it to ourselves as well, rather than smash our heart into a million pieces? If you correct your mind, the rest of your life will fall into place. And it's an ongoing process. You can correct your mind and it can come back again. You know, if we've been doing this as a habit for many, many years, then we are going to need to shift. Is there questions coming in?
No, we just had Sarah. Thank you, Aviva. Are there any other questions? Perhaps if we unmute everyone, they can ask you questions directly. Laura, can we unmute everyone?
Yes, I have unmuted everyone.
Okay,
I have a question for Aviva.
Okay.
Aviva, I want to ask you, you know, as humans, we naturally seek the approval of others. So, like, how do you find a balance with this when one would naturally seek the approval of someone, especially a superior figure? How do you work that in?
Look, I think it's important to have a balance, because we do want to improve ourselves. You know, we do want to grow. We do want to show what we're capable of, because that's often how we are remunerated, and that's often how we achieve more responsibility. So it's how do we have a balance between doing our best and growing, but also not taking it to the degree where we're so focused on trying to prove ourselves that we lose ourselves in the process. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted
Okay,
to
I have a question.
Okay.
Sorry. Can I? Hello?
Sure. Is that
Can you hear
right?
me? Yeah. I just want to ask you, what about repetitive thoughts? Like, I don't know, bordering on obsessive. Like, what about, you know, when a thought goes round and round in you?
Great question. What I want to do now is do this Ho'oponopono prayer for healing, because this breaks the chain of negative thoughts, spiraling thoughts, ruminating thoughts, obsessive thoughts. So can I share with you this now? Because this can be used at any time, and it's quite simple and very effective. Would that be useful?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so this is a very strange name, Ho'oponopono. The guy on the left here, he's a doctor, Dr. Len. He's now a retired therapist from Hawaii. He was able to work with prisoners who were mentally classified as mentally insane, and he used this prayer daily, many times a day, and was actually able to cure them. So it's quite amazing that this process not only heals ourselves, but it's got the power to heal other people. So now this woman here, Mabel Katz, nice Jewish woman from Argentina, she started to learn with him and travel with him and started to use this prayer in her practice. And she's been running workshops around the world. She's written books. She's got a website. So if you do want to look her up, it's mabelkatz.com. And she gives free resources as well. But what they're saying is, if you say this over and over again, it breaks the cycle and it starts to offer yourself self-compassion and kindness. And you don't even have to remember all 4 statements. Even if you remember 1, it's fine. Just keep repeating it. And I actually had an experience of being asked to do this by a wise therapist after I lost my husband 10 years ago. And it did actually help, because I was stuck, very stuck in fear, very stuck in kind of depressed, hopeless thoughts, post-traumatic stress disorder with images that kept repeating, and just, it was a very, very challenging time. And I was recommended to do this, and it does actually help. So it might sound weird, especially if you don't, you know, kind of see yourself as someone who is worthy. To say this to yourself can be quite hard, but it's actually very, very crucial. So you tell yourself, I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you. Doesn't matter what the thought is. You could be telling yourself, I shouldn't have done this, I wish I hadn't have said that, I wish. You just say, close your eyes, I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you. So I'd like us all to just try that. And to say it not just in your head, but to allow the words to filter down into your heart. And it might feel difficult, but go with it anyway. Are you all up for that?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for Aviva? So, Aviva, thank you so much for the absolutely incredible webinar. Your content, the way you put it forward, is really so beautiful and valuable to every single one of us. I think that were on this